Commander Jake Morrison stared out the viewport of his diplomatic shuttle, watching Zerion Prime grow larger against the star-dotted void. The planet's crystalline surface caught the light of its binary suns, creating prismatic rainbows that danced across its atmosphere like some cosmic light show. Beautiful, sure, but Jake would have preferred a nice, straightforward asteroid mining station for this meeting. At least those didn't come with the risk of accidentally insulting an entire alien civilization by using the wrong fork. Approaching Zerion Prime, Commander, announced Lieutenant Chen from the pilot's seat. The Etherian delegation is expecting us at the Crystal Palace in approximately 15 minutes. Jake adjusted his dress uniform collar, which felt tighter than a black hole's event horizon. Remind me again why Command thought sending a grunt like me to handle delicate diplomatic negotiations was a good idea. Because, sir, you're the only officer who managed to end the Proxima incident without starting a war, Chen replied with barely concealed amusement. That was pure luck and you know it. Plus, I'm pretty sure offering to arm wrestle their war chief isn't standard diplomatic protocol. The shuttle shuddered slightly as they entered Zerion's atmosphere, passing through layers of aurora that shouldn't exist according to human physics, but apparently worked just fine for the Etherians. Jake had stopped questioning alien science after the third time someone had explained how their faster-than-light communication crystals operated through harmonic resonance of quantum consciousness. He preferred his technology like his coffee, functional, and without a philosophy degree required to operate it. Below them, the Crystal Palace emerged from the planetary surface like a frozen waterfall, its spires twisting impossibly upward in defiance of gravity. The structure pulsed with soft blue light that seemed to breathe with a life of its own. Jake had seen stranger things in his 15 years exploring the galaxy, but the Etherians definitely had a flair for the dramatic. "Sir, incoming transmission from the palace," Chen announced. The holographic display flickered to life, revealing an Etherian courtier whose elongated ears twitched with what Jake had learned to recognize as nervous energy. The alien's silver-blue skin seemed to shimmer in the transmission's light. "Commander Morrison, welcome to Zerion Prime. Her Royal Highness Princess Lyra awaits your arrival in the Hall of Echoing Thoughts. Please follow the guidance crystals to the designated landing platform." Jake nodded formally. "Thank you, we'll be right down." The transmission ended and he turned to Chen. "Hall of Echoing Thoughts. Do they name everything here like they're writing poetry?" "Better than the Zephyrian name, sir. Remember Ambassador GXTHL Zorp." "Point taken. At least I can pronounce Lyra without risking a hernia." The shuttle touched down on a landing platform that appeared to be carved from a single massive crystal. As Jake disembarked, he felt the strange sensation of Zerion's gravity, slightly lighter than Earth standard, but with an odd pulling sensation that seemed to tug at his bones in impossible directions. The planet's 3 moons hung visible in the day sky, casting overlapping shadows that moved independently of their light sources. A delegation of Etherian guards waited to escort him, their ceremonial armor reflecting the prismatic light in dazzling patterns. Jake followed them through corridors that seemed to grow around them as they walked, the crystal walls reshaping themselves to accommodate their passage. He'd given up trying to understand how Etherian architecture worked after his briefing materials had included phrases like living mineral consciousness and architecturally sentient building materials. The Hall of Echoing Thoughts lived up to its name. Every footstep, every whispered breath seemed to reverberate with musical undertones that transformed mundane sounds into something approaching symphony. Jake made a mental note to avoid clearing his throat during the negotiations unless he wanted to accidentally compose an opera. At the hall's center, Princess Lyra waited on a throne that appeared to be growing from the floor like a crystalline tree. Jake's first thought was that the intelligence reports hadn't done her justice. The princess possessed the characteristic Etherian features, the elongated ears, silver-blue skin, and violet eyes, but there was something in her bearing that spoke of sharp intelligence and carefully controlled power. Her ears, longer than those of her courtiers, twitched slightly as she observed his approach. "Commander Morrison," she said, her voice carrying that musical quality that all Etherian speech seemed to possess. "Welcome to Zerion Prime. I trust your journey was educational." Jake stopped at what he hoped was the appropriate distance and offered a formal bow that he'd practiced exactly 17 times in the shuttle's mirror. "Your Highness, thank you for agreeing to these negotiations. And yes, very educational. I learned that hyperspace makes terrible coffee somehow taste even worse." A ripple of what might have been amusement passed through the assembled courtiers, and Princess Lyrale's ears twitched in what Jake's cultural briefing had suggested was the Etherian equivalent of a raised eyebrow. "Indeed," she replied. "Perhaps we can offer you something more palatable during our discussions. Shall we begin?" The negotiations began with what Jake could only describe as the galaxy's most elaborate game of verbal chess. Princess Lyrale opened with a formal recitation of territorial boundaries that had apparently been disputed since before humans had figured out fire, while Jake responded with Earth's standard diplomatic position, which boiled down to, "Can't we all just get along?" "The mining rights to the Kalos Nebula have been under Etherian jurisdiction for 700 standard years," the princess stated, her voice carrying harmonics that made the crystal walls hum in response. Jake consulted his data pad, trying not to wince as the device's basic electronic beeping sounded painfully crude in the musical environment. "According to our records, the nebula was unclaimed when the first human survey ships arrived. Of course, our records only go back about 50 years for that sector, so there might be some chronological discrepancies." Princess Lyrale's elongated ears twitched, and Jake was beginning to recognize this as her tell when she found something either amusing or irritating. Given the circumstances, he was betting on irritating. "Commander, are you suggesting that your people's inability to maintain proper historical records grants you territorial rights?" "Not exactly, Your Highness. I'm suggesting that maybe we could share the nebula like civilized beings instead of arguing over who saw it first. It's big enough for both our mining operations, and honestly, space is kind of vast. Plenty of room for everyone." The assembled Etherian courtiers exchanged glances that Jake couldn't quite interpret, but their ear-twitching seemed more pronounced. He was either making progress or about to cause a diplomatic incident. In his experience, those two outcomes were often indistinguishable until after the fact. "The Kalos Nebula is sacred to our people, Commander. It is where our ancestors first touched the Song of Stars and learned to shape crystal with thought alone." Jake nodded seriously, though privately he wondered how anyone could hear songs from a cloud of ionized gas. "I understand, Your Highness. Sacred sites are important. Perhaps we could establish a joint research facility. Human mining expertise combined with Etherian, song-touching abilities." This earned him several more ear twitches, and he was starting to feel like he was conducting some sort of alien orchestra. The negotiations continued for hours, covering everything from trade routes to communication protocols. Jake discovered that Etherian diplomatic procedure required each speaker to wait for the crystal formations to finish resonating before the next person could talk, which made for very musical but painfully slow progress. "The question of the Vorthan refugees remains unresolved," Princess Lyrale noted as they moved through their agenda. "Your people offer them sanctuary, but refuse to share their technological contributions." "Well, Your Highness, the Vorthans did ask for asylum specifically because they didn't want their technology weaponized. We're kind of obligated to respect that request, being the good guys and all." "The good guys?" The princess's violet eyes seemed to sparkle with something that might have been humor. How refreshingly direct. "I find honesty works better than fancy words. Saves time, too. Though I admit it doesn't sound nearly as elegant as everything sounds here." As the formal session concluded, Princess Lyra extended an invitation that Jake's cultural briefing had warned him about. "Commander, you must join us for the evening meal. It would be discourteous to refuse." The warning had been clear. Refusing Etherian hospitality was considered a grave insult, but accepting it meant navigating a minefield of customs that could accidentally commit him to anything from a trade agreement to a marriage contract. "I'd be honored, Your Highness." The dining hall featured a table that appeared to be carved from a single piece of rainbow-colored crystal, surrounded by chairs that molded themselves to each occupant's form. Jake tried not to look too impressed as his seat adjusted to provide what was undoubtedly the most comfortable sitting experience of his life. The meal itself was an adventure in xenobiology. Each course arrived floating on platforms of crystallized light, while Etherian musicians played instruments that seemed to grow from the walls themselves. Jake managed to navigate the first few courses without incident, though he suspected the glowing blue fruit he'd just eaten might have been sentient. "The meal pleases you, Commander?" Princess Lyra asked, her ears tilted forward in what his briefing had identified as polite attention. "Everything is delicious, Your Highness. Though I have to ask, was that last course supposed to change colors when I bit into it? The shimmer fruit responds to the emotional state of the consumer. Yours appears to be cycling through confusion, amusement, and what I believe humans call mild panic." Jake laughed. "That's probably accurate. I'm still adjusting to food that reads my mind." "Not your mind, Commander, your spirit's resonance, much more reliable than thoughts which can be deceptive." As the evening progressed, Jake found himself genuinely enjoying the conversation. Princess Lyra proved to be not just politically sharp, but genuinely witty, with a dry sense of humor that caught him off guard. When he complimented the musical ambience by saying it made even his terrible table manners sound sophisticated, her laugh created harmonics that made the entire room chime like wind chimes. Then came the final course, and Jake's cultural briefing suddenly proved inadequate. The floating crystal platform presented what appeared to be a flower made of solidified starlight, beautiful and obviously significant given the suddenly expectant attention of every Etherian in the room. "This is wonderful," Jake said, reaching for the flower. "It's absolutely beautiful." The reaction was immediate and dramatic. Every Etherian in the room gasped, their ears standing straight up in what Jake now recognized as extreme surprise. Princess Lyra's violet eyes went wide, and she began speaking rapidly in what sounded like several different Etherian dialects at once. "Did I just accidentally declare war?" Jake asked weakly. "Worse," Princess Lyra replied, though her ears were now twitching in what looked suspiciously like suppressed laughter. "You just proposed marriage to me, in front of the entire court." The accidental marriage proposal turned out to be surprisingly easy to resolve, requiring only a formal statement of cultural misunderstanding, and Jake's solemn promise to avoid touching any more flowers without explicit instruction. Princess Lyra seemed more amused than offended, though her courtiers spent the next hour whispering among themselves, with their ears twitching in what Jake was learning to recognize as the Etherian equivalent of nervous chatter. "Perhaps we should continue our discussions in a more private setting," the princess suggested once the ceremonial flower had been safely removed from Jake's reach, away from potential matrimonial hazards. She led him through corridors that seemed to reshape themselves as they walked, the crystal walls flowing like water around their passage. Jake had stopped trying to understand Etherian architecture after his third attempt to retrace his steps had led him to a room that definitely hadn't existed 5 minutes earlier. "Your Highness, I have to ask, do your buildings have some kind of consciousness, or am I just really bad at navigation?" "Both, actually. The palace crystal network is quasi-sentient, and it enjoys rearranging itself to confuse visitors. Consider it a form of architectural humor." "Great! My first diplomatic mission to an alien world, and even the buildings are laughing at me." They arrived at what Princess Lyra called her private chambers, though the space was larger than most human starships. The walls here pulsed with a softer light, and the air felt different, charged with some kind of energy that made Jake's skin tingle. "The environmental processors are acting up again," the princess explained, noticing his discomfort. "Our crystal technology sometimes develops personality quirks. This particular system has decided it prefers a higher ionic charge in the atmosphere." As if summoned by her words, the room's lighting suddenly flared, and Jake felt a wave of heat wash over him. His diplomatic uniform, already uncomfortably formal, became stifling in the charged air. "Sorry, Your Highness," he said, shrugging out of his jacket. "If I pass out from heat stroke, it might send the wrong diplomatic message." "Of course, Commander. Please make yourself comfortable." The relief was immediate, but as Jake loosened his collar and rolled up his sleeves, he noticed the room's temperature continuing to climb. The energy in the air was making his uniform's synthetic fibers cling uncomfortably to his skin. "This is ridiculous," he muttered, pulling off his dress shirt to reveal the standard-issue undershirt beneath. "I feel like I'm trying to negotiate inside a plasma reactor." The moment the shirt came off, Princess Lyra went completely still, her violet eyes fixed on his chest with an intensity that made Jake suddenly self-conscious. He glanced down, wondering if he'd somehow violated another cultural taboo, and saw only his old undershirt and the familiar scar that ran diagonally across his chest, a souvenir from the Centauri Rebellion when a plasma rifle had nearly turned him into cosmic barbecue. "Your Highness, is everything all right?" Lyra's voice came out as barely a whisper. You can't be real." Jake looked down at himself again, then back at the princess, who appeared to be staring at his scar as if it were some kind of supernatural phenomenon. "I'm sorry, what? I mean, I know the scar isn't exactly attractive, but—" "The mark," she breathed, taking a step closer. "The sacred mark, it's exactly as the prophecy described." Prophecy? Jake's experience with prophecies was limited to fortune cookies and his grandmother's uncanny ability to predict when he was about to do something stupid. "Your Highness, it's just a scar. I got it during a firefight on Centauri Station when I was too slow ducking behind cover. Nothing prophetic about it." Princess Lyra stopped pacing and fixed him with a look that somehow managed to be both intense and amused. "Commander, do you believe in coincidence?" "I believe in a lot of things. Coincidence, Murphy's Law, the fundamental principle that military intelligence is an oxymoron, and the universal truth that coffee is better than tea. But not in destiny." Jake scratched his head, suddenly aware that he was having a theological discussion while half-dressed with an alien princess in a room full of temperamental crystal technology. "Your Highness, I'm a soldier. I believe in preparation, training, and having a backup plan. Destiny sounds like something people invoke when they don't want to take responsibility for their own decisions." "And yet," Princess Lyra said, her ears tilting forward with what he was learning meant she was about to make a point. "Here you are. On my world, at exactly the moment when our peoples need to find common ground, bearing the exact symbol our ancestors described 3,000 years ago." Jake looked down at his scar again. It was just tissue damage, slightly raised and lighter than the surrounding skin. He'd never given it much thought beyond occasionally wondering if the medical bay could have done a better job with the healing process. "Your Highness, with all due respect, I think you might be reading a bit too much into some old battle damage." Princess Lyra smiled, and for the first time since they'd met, her expression seemed genuinely warm rather than diplomatically polite. "Perhaps, Commander, but perhaps not. After all, the universe has a rather sophisticated sense of humor." Princess Lyra's mention of prophecy had Jake feeling like he'd accidentally wandered into someone else's epic space opera. The kind where the hero discovers he's actually the chosen one, masters ancient powers, and saves the galaxy before the credits roll. Unfortunately, Jake's personal experience suggested he was more likely to trip over his own feet than fulfill cosmic destiny. Your Highness, I appreciate the whole Marked One theory, but I think there might be some confusion here. The only thing I'm destined for is a really awkward report to my commanding officer about how I accidentally proposed marriage during a diplomatic mission. Come with me, Commander, the princess said, her ears twitching with barely contained excitement. There is something you must see. She led him deeper into the palace, through passages that seemed to grow more ancient as they walked. The crystal walls here were older, their light dimmer and more mysterious. Jake noticed that his footsteps no longer created the musical tones they had in the main halls. These crystals seemed to absorb sound rather than amplify it. This part of the palace predates the current structure by several millennia, Princess Lyra explained as they walked. It was built around the Archive of Whispers, where our most sacred knowledge is preserved. Archive of Whispers? Let me guess. Another poetically named location where ancient aliens stored their cosmic wisdom. Actually, it's called that because the storage crystals literally whisper, constantly. It makes research rather challenging, but the effect is considered sacred. They descended a spiral staircase that seemed to twist through dimensions Jake wasn't entirely sure existed. His inner ear was sending him increasingly confused signals about which way was up, and he was beginning to suspect that Etherian architecture didn't follow the same physical laws as the rest of the universe. Princess, is it normal for stairs to exist in more than 3 dimensions? Or should I be concerned about my sanity? The archive exists partially outside normal spacetime. It allows for greater information density. Also, it prevents unauthorized access, since most people become hopelessly lost within the first few minutes. Great. So if I'm wrong about this prophecy thing, I'll be stuck wandering through interdimensional library stacks for eternity. The crystals would eventually guide you out, probably. The Archive of Whispers lived up to its name. The moment they entered the vast chamber, Jake was surrounded by a constant murmur of voices speaking in languages he couldn't identify. Towering crystal formations filled the space, each one pulsing with stored information and contributing to the whispered cacophony. The knowledge of our entire civilization is preserved here, Princess Lyra said, her voice somehow cutting through the whispers, including the prophecies of the first seers. She approached a particularly large crystal cluster, its surface covered in symbols that seemed to shift and change as Jake watched. The princess placed her hand on the crystal, and suddenly the whispers organized themselves into something approaching coherent speech. "Show us the prophecy of the Marked One," she commanded. The crystal's response was immediate. A holographic projection materialized above them, displaying an image that made Jake's breath catch. The figure in the projection was unmistakably human, standing between representations of human and Etherian civilizations. Across the figure's chest was a curved line that matched Jake's scar with uncomfortable precision. "The Marked One shall come when the two peoples stand at the crossroads of war and peace," the crystal whispered in perfect standard galactic. "He shall bear the curve of crossing destinies, carved by the fires of conflict, and through him the ancient barriers shall fall." Jake stared at the projection, then at his own chest, then back at the projection. Okay, that's actually pretty specific, but it could be coincidence, right? I mean, how many ways can you scar a human chest? There must be thousands of people with similar marks. "The prophecy continues, Commander." The crystal's whispers grew more intense, and new images appeared in the projection. Jake saw scenes of cooperation between humans and Etherians, shared technologies, and what looked like joint exploration of previously unknown regions of space. "The Marked One shall bridge the gap between song and silence, between the crystal singers and the void walkers. Through his guidance, both peoples shall find the path to the stars beyond stars." "Stars beyond stars?" Jake asked. "That sounds like marketing copy for a travel agency." "The outer galaxies, Commander. Regions of space that neither of our civilizations has been able to reach alone. The prophecy suggests that our combined capabilities might make such exploration possible. Jake rubbed his temples, feeling the beginning of a headache that probably had nothing to do with the archive's interdimensional properties. Your Highness, with all due respect to your ancestors and their crystal ball collection, I'm just a soldier. I barely passed xenobiology in basic training. I can't carry a tune to save my life, and my idea of advanced technology is figuring out which button makes the coffee maker work. Princess Lyra's ears tilted, in what he was learning meant she found his protests amusing. The prophecy doesn't require you to be perfect, Commander. It only requires you to be willing. Willing to do what exactly? To help both our peoples move beyond the limitations that have kept us separate. To be the bridge between our civilizations that allows us to reach for something greater than either could achieve alone. The crystal projection shifted again, showing images of human pragmatism combined with Etherian artistry, human technology enhanced by Etherian crystal singing abilities, and joint ventures that seemed to push the boundaries of what either species had thought possible. This is all very impressive, Jake said, gesturing at the holographic display. But there's one small problem with your prophecy. I don't actually know how to be a bridge between civilizations. My diplomatic experience consists of one accidentally proposed marriage and a really awkward dinner where I apparently ate sentient fruit. The prophecy also mentions that the marked one would be guided by the songkeeper of the crystal throne. Jake looked at her suspiciously. Let me guess, that would be you. It would indeed. According to the ancient texts, my role is to help you understand both our peoples well enough to find the common ground between them. So basically, you're saying that cosmic destiny has stuck us together as a team to save both our civilizations. That's a rather simplified interpretation, but essentially accurate. Jake was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. Finally, he looked up at the princess with a rueful smile. You know what the really ironic part is? I came here expecting the worst part of this mission to be figuring out proper fork etiquette at dinner. Princess Lyra's laugh created harmonics that made the crystal archive hum in response. Commander, I suspect that dinner etiquette will be the least of our challenges. The revelation of the prophecy created what Jake could only describe as controlled chaos throughout the Crystal Palace. Within hours of their return from the Archive of Whispers, word had spread through the Etherian court that the human diplomat might actually be their long-awaited Marked One. The reactions ranged from reverent awe to skeptical dismissal, with a healthy dose of political maneuvering thrown in for good measure. Commander Morrison, announced High Counselor Thalen, his elongated ears practically vibrating with indignation. Surely you cannot expect us to restructure centuries of diplomatic protocol based on an ancient prophecy and a coincidental scar. Jake, who had spent the morning fielding similar protests while trying to figure out how to diplomatically explain the situation to his own superiors, was beginning to appreciate why most chosen ones in the stories he'd read seemed to have anger management issues. Counselor, I'm not asking anyone to restructure anything. Honestly, I'm just trying to figure out how to write a mission report that doesn't make me sound completely insane. Princess Lyra, seated beside him in the emergency council session, managed to look both regal and amused. Perhaps we should focus on practical matters rather than theological debates. The prophecy suggests that cooperation between our peoples could open new possibilities for exploration and technological advancement. Easy for you to say, Jake muttered. Nobody's expecting you to suddenly develop mystical bridge-building powers. The council chamber erupted in a dozen different conversations as various factions debated the implications. Jake noticed that the Etherian tendency to make everything sound musical extended to their arguments. Even heated political disputes created harmonies that would have made human composers weep with envy. If I may interrupt, Jake called out, raising his voice above the melodic chaos. I have a suggestion that might satisfy everyone. The chamber fell silent, all eyes turning toward him. Jake suddenly understood why stage fright existed. Having an entire room of alien dignitaries hanging on your every word was remarkably intimidating. What if we treat this as a trial run? Set up some joint projects, small-scale cooperation efforts, and see what happens. If the prophecy is right and we're supposed to be bridging civilizations, it should become obvious pretty quickly. If I'm just a guy with an unfortunately prophetic scar, well, we'll still have improved relations between our peoples. Counselor Thalen's ears twitched skeptically. And what form would these joint projects take? Well, Jake said, warming to the idea, your people are masters of crystal technology and harmonic engineering. My people are pretty good at stubborn problem-solving and making things work under impossible conditions. Combine those approaches, and we might surprise ourselves. Princess Lyra leaned forward with interest. The nebula mining rights we discussed earlier, what if we approached it as a collaborative venture rather than a territorial dispute? Exactly. Your people could use their crystal singing to enhance extraction efficiency, while human engineering could provide the heavy-duty equipment and logistics support. Everyone benefits. Nobody has to give up their sacred sites, and we all make money. The idea seemed to resonate with the council, though Jake suspected the musical metaphor was doing more heavy lifting than his actual diplomatic skills. Over the following hours, they outlined a framework for cooperation that went far beyond simple mining rights. By evening, they had drafted agreements for joint research stations, cultural exchange programs, and what Princess Lyra insisted on calling harmonic engineering workshops, which sounded much more impressive than humans and aliens figuring out how to work together without accidentally blowing anything up. You realize, the princess said as they walked through the palace gardens later that night, that whether or not you believe in the prophecy, you've essentially committed to fulfilling it. The gardens were a marvel of living crystal formations that responded to the ambient sounds around them, creating an ever-shifting landscape of light and music. Jake had stopped being surprised by Etherian technology that seemed to operate on pure aesthetic principles. I noticed that, yeah. Funny how that worked out. Though I have to admit, the whole mystical chosen one thing sits easier when it's really just guy who's willing to try something new. The prophecy never claimed you would be mystical, Commander. It only said you would be willing to bridge the gap between our peoples. Jake paused beside a formation of singing crystals that were currently harmonizing with the sound of distant night birds. Princess, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you actually believe I'm this marked one from your prophecy? Or are you just really good at rolling with unexpected situations? Princess Lyra's laugh created ripples of light through the crystal formations around them. Commander, I've spent my entire life preparing to be a diplomat and political leader. I've learned that the difference between prophecy and practical opportunity is often just a matter of perspective. That's probably the most diplomatically honest answer I've ever heard. I try to be thorough. Besides, even if you're not cosmically destined to save our civilizations, you're still the first human I've met who managed to accidentally propose marriage and somehow make it charming rather than catastrophic. Jake groaned. Are people going to be bringing that up for the rest of my career? Commander, if our joint ventures succeed, that story will be told for generations. Children of both our species will learn about the day the great bridge builder accidentally initiated marriage protocols with crystallized starlight. Great, I'll be remembered throughout the galaxy as the guy who tried to marry a flower. They walked in comfortable silence for a while, the crystal gardens shifting and singing around them in response to their presence. Jake found himself thinking about the changes that had occurred in just a few short days, arriving as a reluctant diplomat, accidentally becoming a prophetic figure, and somehow ending up genuinely excited about the possibilities ahead. Princess, when we get back to the real work tomorrow, and I inevitably mess up some crucial cultural protocol or accidentally declare war on someone. You won't be doing it alone, Commander. The prophecy mentioned that the Songkeeper would guide the Marked One, remember? So we're partners in this cosmic destiny business. Partners in whatever this turns out to be. Cosmic destiny, practical cooperation, or just two people trying to prevent their species from making the same old mistakes. Jake looked up at Zerion's 3 moons, hanging in the star-filled sky like a promise of all the unexplored possibilities waiting beyond the known worlds. For the first time since arriving on this strange, musical planet, he felt genuinely optimistic about the future. You know what, Princess? Whether I'm the Marked One or just a soldier with good timing, I think we're going to do something pretty amazing together. I believe you're right, Commander, though I do hope you'll let me handle any future flower-related negotiations. Jake laughed, the sound creating new harmonies with the crystal formations around them. Deal. But if we're going to be saving civilizations together, you might as well call me Jake. Very well,